The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous supporters. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/donate. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 128.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. Been renewed.
Is when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems not a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Position purpose. Wearing a bit thin. Fantastic. Hell, Scottish. I can complain about things.
Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the first Doctor story, The Reign of Terror. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
Very well. And folks, I want a little advance notice. We're going to have some listener feedback at the end, and I'm going to rely on the panel to remind me in case I forget again to do the feedback. But we have some very nice feedback from you listeners, and I wanted to make sure I let you know that we're going to have that. And also, I want to remind you that if you're listening to this just like online, like on our website, there is a better way to do it, and that is to subscribe to it. So download a podcast app to your phone or to your iPad, or even on your computer, you can get podcast apps. And then subscribe to the show in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn. Some podcast apps let you subscribe directly from within those. Or you can even subscribe on YouTube, where you should hit the bell to make sure you get notifications. That way you'll always get the newest episodes. And it helps us. It gives us an idea of how many people are listening. Is this the sort of thing that people want to hear? I mean, if nobody's listening, if we can't tell if anybody's listening, why are we doing it? I mean, we'd probably still talk about Doctor Who because we enjoy it, but exactly. You know what I mean? We want to know that you're out there, and that's one way of doing that. And it supports us. It helps us. It really does. So I just want to encourage you. So this is The Reign of Terror. We're still in the first season of Doctor Who with the first Doctor.
It's the end of the first season.
Yes, it's the very last serial. It's 6 episodes. And it aired in August and September of 1964. And the companions are still Ian, Barbara, and Susan. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we should point out is, first, the genre of this. We're still in the time period where Doctor Who was giving us pure historicals. This Correct. Is a historical story from the French Revolution, July of 1794. And there are no aliens. There's no science fiction, no magic.
There are aliens, the Doctor and Susan.
Right, apart from the Doctor and Susan.
The only science fiction-y aspect of this is the fact that these people can travel back in time to the French Revolution or the Reign of Terror.
Right.
So
That's right.
It's not like modern Who were, let's have a historically based event and all of a sudden the Daleks show up.
Right. Or clockwork, robots, or a portal to another dimension, and that's what New Who has been doing. And I've said it before when we talked about the second Doctor story where they went to the Battle of Culloden, the Highlanders, it was called. I think my favorite classic Who episodes from this era are the historicals. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of why that is. And I think part of it is because the science fiction of that era is so dated.
Right.
Like the science fiction from the 60s is kind of dated, that we see in the show. But this is history. It's not dated at all. It's just still a good story that doesn't take you out of it by having, science fiction that's been disproven, shall we say.
That's kind of interesting, too, because in this last season of New Who, the Jodie Whittaker season, there was at least one episode that was pretty close to a classic historical, although still they brought in the science fiction. I'm thinking the one with the partition of Pakistan.
The partition of it. Mm-hmm. The partition of India went, but even then, like you said, it still had aliens.
Yeah. But that was about as close as they've come to a classic historical story
and
that they have anytime in New Who.
And the Rosa Parks episode, but then in that one, they had the future racist alien time traveler or future racist time traveler guy.
So be interesting to see if maybe that's actually a movement to try to get back to something more like a historical. I don't know.
I would love it.
It would be nice. The latest of the pure historicals they did was in the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison's time. It was a 2-parter called Black Orchid.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the last of the true historicals. But I'd love them to get back to it too, as long as they don't just use it as a vehicle for preaching.
Right. But I do like the idea of like, this is the part of the DNA of Doctor Who. It was originally intended to be, we're going to teach kids about history and science. And admittedly, we're kind of far afield from science.
Yeah.
But
one of my favorite historicals is from the First Doctor's time. It's Marco Polo, which was a lengthy serial, and it was just I so wish I hope they do a video reconstruction of it, an animation.
Right.
Because the photos from the sets are gorgeous, and I've heard the story, and it's just a really, really great adventure of just they get wrapped up in Marco Polo and Genghis Khan and everything, and the Doctor is like has this really fascinating relationship with Genghis Khan, and it's just very interesting. The Aztecs was another one that was a pure historical that was very dramatic.
Yes, and very good, very well done. I mean, I really enjoyed these. So one thing you mentioned, Jimmy, is another thing we should mention, which is this story is not available in its original form. Not entirely. Yeah, it's 6 episodes, but episodes 4 and 5 are missing, and this goes back to the fact that back in the day, BBC did not save the tapes. They did not save they weren't even tapes, where they were reel-to-reels, basically film. They didn't save the films of Doctor Who episodes, many of them in the first and second Doctor's time, and there was a period of time when many fewer of them were available, and some of those have been recovered from around the world. There's a really great video that Jimmy pointed us to, which is like an hour and a half long, I think it was, talking about all of the missing Doctor Who out there, where it might be, where it could be, where we might see it in the future. I'm going to spring this on you guys now, but maybe we should do an episode where we talk about that video, just the missing Doctor Who. Sure. I think that'd be an interesting little deviation from our usual discussion.
We could also, since we've mentioned that video, we should put a link to it in the show notes so people can watch it for themselves.
If it's the video that you're talking about or that I'm thinking of, he actually did it kind of as a serial format and then connected them in. Yeah, I've watched about half of his serials, and it's very well done because it shows where did these videos go. Because what happened was they aired it on the BBC, and then they sold it to or leased it to like Australia and India,
Singapore, Nigeria,
United States, all these
English-speaking countries. Yeah.
And then when it was done, it was supposed to come back to the BBC and be destroyed. Well, sometimes it never did get back. Sometimes people took it to their private collection, things like that. And that's where they're finding them now, where they'll find this vault in a, Australian TV studio somewhere. Oh, there's, 3 episodes of Doctor Who sitting here.
Right. Well, in fact, with this one, the episodes 4 and 5, they have all the rest from Cyprus, but the reels with 4 and 5 on it were destroyed when the building they were being saved in was hit by an explosive during the Cyprus civil war between Greece and Turkey. I mean, it just there's history all over the Doctor Who, just as long as the span of it is.
But the nice thing is they've reconstructed those with professional animation.
Yes.
So if you buy the DVD of The Reign of Terror, you get to watch the whole story. It's just a couple of the episodes are animated, but they use the original soundtrack.
Yep.
Now, as far as I could tell, the animation was not available streaming online. So I listened to this via an Audible soundtrack with linking narration by Carol Ann Ford, who plays Susan.
Right.
In the episode. And there's a nice little bit at the end, an interview with Carol Ann Ford, which might be on the DVD, I bet. I don't know, where she talks about this episode and being on the show, which was a little bit of fun. But I'll put a link to the Audible and to the DVD in the show notes.
We should mention that. So the good news is they've recovered about half of the missing episodes, or at least half of the missing episodes. For the ones they haven't recovered, we have audio for all of them because fans use their reel-to-reel recorders off the air. So we have audio for everything. And then there are various reconstructions either based on photographs that were taken off the television, what are called telesnaps, or You have audio versions with linking narration, like by the original actors, like Carol Ann Ford in this case. And in some cases, they've done the BBC has commissioned professional animations for reconstruction, and that's what you get if you buy the DVD of this. So I saw it on the DVD, and so I got to see the additional animated stuff.
I do wish I'd seen it that way, because I saw there are a few clips from the show available online, so I was able to see the Doctor's grandiose costume that he wears at one point, and some of the different actors. So it was nice to be able to see some of that, but I wish I'd had that access to that to see more of it. But I'm glad we have a variety of experiences with this show, the episode, so we can talk about our differences. So let's jump into the discussion then and talk about it. So as this episode starts, the Doctor is still mad at Ian and Barbara from the Sensorites episode. That was the one that immediately preceded this. And he's ready to just kick them off the TARDIS. He's taking them back to England. He lands. He says, "Okay, we're back. Get out." And
doesn't even
Ian
look.
is it doesn't even look, doesn't check. Ian's like, "Hey, you sure we're actually where we are? Because you said this before."
Right. And in fact, he almost stranded them in the Marco Polo episode. And so here he almost strands them, not realizing they're not in England in the 1960s. They're in 17th century or 18th century France.
Closer in both time and space this time.
Yeah.
And same planet.
Yeah. And Susan, of course, is distraught at their leaving, but they're okay with leaving. And Ian even points out the longer we let it go to leave, the harder it's going to be. We never intended to travel all this time and stuff. The Doctor's just very indifferent to them, wants them to kind of split. In fact, in hindsight, now the viewers didn't know this at the time, but Ian and Barbara are only halfway through their run. So they're going to be here all next season too. So like another 40 episodes.
Apparently, Ian ticked off the Doctor when he said of the Sensorites, the Earth spaceship crew, at least they know where they're going. And the Doctor took exception to that slur on his ability to navigate the TARDIS.
Which he doesn't know how to do, so.
Which was entirely accurate. But I like the fact that Ian sort of paves over, he soothes the Doctor's ego by saying, "Well, Leo, let's have a drink before we leave."
Ian totally manipulates the Doctor so that they don't get stranded.
Yes. So they've landed in the countryside. There's they notice that there's no lights. There's no electric light, and there's a farm. And they find a boy who tells them that they're actually in France near Paris. Now they still don't know that they're in the 18th century.
Right.
But they realize, okay, well, at least we're in the vicinity of England.
But they go to the farmhouse and they find a chest that has 18th century dresses in it. And so that tells Barbara, the historian, something. And then they find passes that are signed, travel documents that have blank names for the recipients, but are signed by Robespierre. And for people who don't know, Robespierre was a French political figure. He was a member of the ironically named Committee for Public Safety and the president of the National Convention, and he's currently the first deputy of the National Convention. So he's basically in charge of France, and he's the one running the Reign of Terror.
Yes.
So the
Reign of Terror, was just to kind of to point out as well, was following the revolution when they guillotined the nobles. They kept going because once you've started seeing enemies everywhere, then you start to find enemies everywhere, which comes up in this episode.
Yeah,
and so people are being turned out at the drop of a hat. They're being accused of being royalists, and let's get rid of my enemy by accusing them of something. And so this is literally a time of terror for people.
Yeah. And you just think about the name. I mean, we use the phrase Reign of Terror without really thinking about it. It's kind of become shop worn. But think about what it meant when it was coined. A reign is what a king has. Kings reign. But this isn't the reign of a king. Terror itself is reigning in this period of history. Terror is in control.
It's a very, very brutal period of history, both for Catholics and for those who were just happened to be crossed the wrong person at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Priests, religious were killed. If you've heard, what is the
Vendée?
Well, I was thinking like the Carmelites, the story of the Carmelites that were.
Was it the Martyrs of Compiègne? Campagne? Yeah, and in fact, the Vendée was a genocide against Catholics of a particular region. I mean, it was horrible, horrible time, and people were being killed. And as we see in this story, people are being carted off to the Madame Guillotine every day. We had found the most efficient means of mass murderer at the time was the guillotine.
Mass execution.
Yes, yeah, mass execution. And so where they're guillotining people left and right, and that's the time period that they've dropped themselves in. And they find themselves at a safe house in essentially what turns out to be an underground railroad of sorts to get people out of France.
Also, since we're in July 1794, although they don't know that at the time, this is the month Robespierre falls. So they're right at the end of Robespierre's reign. And
which was only about a year, which I thought was interesting.
What's that?
He was only in power as in charge for about a year. It wasn't a long period.
Yeah. Also, interestingly, Susan says once Barbara realizes they're in the Reign of Terror, and Barbara's kind of like, let's get out of here. And Susan's, I don't know if the doctor's going to want to do that. The Reign of Terror is his favorite period in Earth history.
Wow, that says a lot about the doctor.
That is not a good sign about the doctor. Yeah. So they're confronted there by two men who say, if we're to escape from France, we must have faith. If all people are incapable of our trust, we shall take the terror with us. So they encounter them. One of the men wants to shoot the companions. The doctor is off screen. He's upstairs.
They've knocked him out.
That's right.
They knocked him
out.
unconscious.
Yeah, and so they've confronted them, and one of the guys wants to shoot the Ian and Barbara and Susan,
Dargenson.
And the other guy, yes, and the other guy says, no, let's find out, what's going on. And he says,
Rouvray.
Yes, and he says, we have to have faith in humanity. We can't just continue to lack trust in people. We have to begin to trust people, or we will take the terror with us when we go. And I thought that was a very interesting insight, a little human moment here. When we leave, we have to also leave behind the attitude of the terror, where we suspect everyone.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, soldiers who suspect them then show up, and Dargenson is so terrified that he's clearly losing it. He's so terrified, rather than be quiet and hide, he decides to end his anxiety by just walking out and confronting the soldiers, expecting to die. And Rouvray follows him out and tries to talk their way out of it by, I guess, appealing to the sympathies of the ordinary soldiers. But nope, they get shot.
He acts like he's someone who had authority. He used to have authority, and they begin to follow his orders at first, but then he insults them by calling them peasants.
Yeah.
So they kill him in Dargenson.
Yeah. And then they take the captive's companion, and they're about to shoot them too. So Ian, Barbara, and Susan are all captive. The doctor's unconscious, upstairs. But they take the companions captive. They're about to shoot them. But then they decide, no, if we kill them here, we won't get credit for capturing them. So we better take them back to Paris so the magistrate can see them and sentence them to the guillotine.
Right. But then the soldiers burn the house with the doctor locked in a room.
Yeah.
And we are left, what's going to happen to the doctor? Well, that boy comes back. He lets the doctor out. And so the doctor has to make his way to Paris to get them out. Now, meanwhile, in Paris, the companions are put on trial in one of those kangaroo courts where their guilt has already been predetermined. Apparently, it's a Cardassian court.
Exactly.
Their guilt is predetermined, and they're just being sentenced to the guillotine.
The charge is being in the company of traitors because they were found with the royalists.
Yes. They're sent to the prison, the conciergerie, which sounds like a concierge. Isn't that the guy who helps you at the hotel?
The concierge, in French, the conciergerie is the place where the concierge stays. So it's like he's there to help you.
Well, they've got room service. After all, their slop is delivered right to their cells.
That's right. So the jailer makes a lecherous offer to Barbara in exchange for letting her go. But she
slaps him.
She gives him a good one upside the head, which is good for Barbara. And Ian is separated from Barbara and Susan, of course, and put in another cell where he's with a mortally wounded man named Webster.
Who's a Brit.
Important points in the plot, who tells him that after the terror, that France will turn its attention to England. He knows this. This is sort of like everyone knows that once things settle down here, the people who are left in charge will then look outward and start to menace their neighbors. And he wants to
like the Napoleonic Wars, only that he doesn't know about Napoleon yet.
Exactly.
Foreshadowing. And so he tells Ian, he knows he's about to die. So he tells Ian, I want you to find a man whose information will be important to saving England, named James Sterling. And that he'll be found with someone named Jules Renan at the Le Chien Gris, the gray dog.
The sign of Le Chien Gris, which literally means the gray hound. But it's, and I was fascinated by this. It's not just a greyhound. It's not what we think of as a greyhound. It's something called the Gray St. Louis Hound, and it's a breed that is now extinct. But it existed at the time of this story. And then after the French Revolution, it got interbred with other dog breeds, and we no longer have Chien Gris dogs, but they did then.
Interesting. Yeah, they're a handsome-looking dog.
Yeah, by the way, it's what they're referring to when they say at the sign of Le Chien Gris. At the time, they didn't have modern street addresses, and a lot of people couldn't read them anyway if they did. And so what they would do is they'd post signs of something recognizable in front of different businesses. So, like, that's why you have the Green Dragon Tavern or the Red Lion Hotel or things like that. So you'd tell people, go to the sign of the Red Lion, and you'd look for a sign that looked like that, and that would be where you were going. And so the sign of Le Chien Gris is you're going to go look for a sign depicting this dog, and that's the hotel where you're going to find James Sterling and tell him you need to get back to England to tell him about these wars.
Right. Now, the Doctor, meanwhile, is making his way by foot to Paris, which I think they said it was like 12 kilometers from the city where they started off.
Actually, they said 4, but then later the Doctor is seen sitting on a road sign that says 5 kilometers. So he's actually moved away from Paris.
He's gone in the wrong direction. That might be intentional. That would be funny. He still can't find his way even without the TARDIS.
Exactly.
So we have Doctor separation, by the way. That's one of our key aspects of Doctor Who plot. But he encounters this road gang of tax dodgers who are being forced to work on the road under this overseer. And, of course, the Doctor's smart mouth gets him in trouble. He mouths off to the overseer, and the work would go a lot faster if you'd stop yelling at them and start helping fix the road with them. And then the guy says, well, where are your papers?
Why don't you?
Yeah,
exactly.
Where are your papers? Prove that you're not a tax dodger, which is, nice. So the Doctor ends up on the roadside gang. He later on will trick the overseer into letting him get the drop on him.
I do like the way he tricked him. I thought that was pretty clever, where he was able to smuggle some coins
some of his coins. Yeah, well, the overseer is counting his loot in his bag, and the Doctor tries to get him to look up at an eclipse, which is not really happening. And while he's doing that, he takes some money from him.
He picks his pocket.
Yeah, and then drops it on the ground and pretends to dig it up and say, there must be a treasure buried here. And the overseer's like, really? Where? And that's when the Doctor clocks him with a shovel.
Well, he plays off his greed, because all of a sudden he's like, oh, I want all the treasure now. I'm going to, you get out of the way. I'm going to dig up this treasure. Smack.
Yes. Now, back in the conciergerie, Ian attracts the attention of the interrogator, the chief interrogator for Robespierre. His name is Lemaitre,
and he's also James Sterling, who was to be recognized by sight by the guy who died. Why didn't he recognize him if he's the chief interrogator of the jail?
Yes, yeah. That was spoilers, by the way, but yes. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But yes, it will turn out that this is Sterling. Yeah, there's a little bit of hole here, that maybe Webster was wounded and imprisoned before Lemaitre could see him.
That's kind of what I was thinking, but
we can headcanon it any number of ways, but they didn't explain it on screen.
No.
But apparently Lemaitre recognizes Webster because he's trying to figure out if Webster was his contact, I think. And that
puts him on to maybe he gave a message to Ian, but because Ian thinks he's a French official, he doesn't trust him and won't tell him the message or even admit there is one.
He does take Ian off the execution list, but Barbara and Susan are not so lucky.
Yeah, then, by the way, there's a moment where Barbara and Susan have been trying to tunnel their way out of their cell with a crowbar, but then which doesn't really go anywhere. They never get out that way. But there's a moment where Susan goes back to start digging with the crowbar again, and there are rats, and Susan literally jumps up on the bed and screams because of the rats. And it's like, wow, that really happened on television back then. Women would jump up on things and scream at rats.
Yeah, let a rat run in my house, you'll see that happen. That's for sure. I had a rat run by my slider of my back door last year, and you should have seen the screeching and the jumping. But then I got off and I closed the door. But so actually, I had to. Speaking of Susan, she does at this point. She goes into one of her whining spells that she has every once in a while, and then when Barbara's trying to save them from the guillotine, oh, my back hurts. Oh, your neck will hurt if you don't get going. Like, it's just. She's whining. Meanwhile, Barbara's trying to stop them from, dying via the guillotine, and she's whining about having to dig. And
she has a meltdown, and she does it later when they're on the verge of escaping, and she has another meltdown that stops them from escaping. And this is the kind of writing that Carol Ann Ford hated and caused her to leave the series, because she felt like she was being infantilized as a character instead of exploring her character's possibilities. She really liked the previous story, The Sensorites, because in that one, she got psychic powers and got to display agency that moved the plot forward. But here, she's reduced to being a whiny teenager.
Exactly.
Yes, in fact, she talks about that in that extra I was saying on the Audible. She talks about this was one of the, when she was thinking about leaving, and then after this, they convinced her to stick around for longer. But yeah, that was although she does like this episode. Not least because of the dresses that they got to wear, the 18th century dresses. She does say that. So the jailer, meanwhile, looks like an idiot because he lets Ian take his jail key. Accidentally leaves the key in the lock and walks away. And we think, what, this jailer is like the worst jailer ever. Well, we'll find out later that this was arranged.
Yeah, he's also an alcoholic, so, he's not functioning on all cylinders.
Yeah, this is not an efficiently functioning bureaucracy right now in the Reign of Terror. But they're taken away in the cart, which has the tumbril. It's called. It's a very specific kind of cart. And you've seen them if you've ever seen any set in this time period. But they're the type of cart. Never mind. It doesn't really matter. But they're carried away in this cart. And meanwhile, laying in wait are
Barbara and Susan are.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Barbara and Susan are.
Ian's still in jail.
Jules Renan and Jean are laying in wait to rescue whoever's being taken via the cart to the guillotine.
And it's really kind of striking. They've apparently done this before. They've been raiding these. That's how the two previous guys.
Rouvray and D'Artagnan or whatever.
Yeah, they got. That's how they got away. Is they were rescued in the same way. So Jules and Jacques or Jean apparently are just do-gooders who are ambushing at great risk to themselves, ambushing execution trains to rescue innocent people they don't even know.
Right. Yeah. In fact, because when you think about it, this is a time period where all weapons were single shot. So there are two guys. And you're going to have two shots against whoever. So unless you're carrying extra pistols, which some people sometimes did, you're outnumbered pretty quickly. And so it's a dicey proposition here. So yeah, getting the drop on them is not easy. But they take the Barbara and Susan off to a safe house with them where they meet Jules'
which is
sister.
Jules's own house.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And they meet Danielle, who doesn't get a lot to do in this episode.
She gets to wear a dress.
She does, yes. She is a Parisian woman of the era. Ian, meanwhile, escapes because he has the key, the jailer's key, except we find out that Lemaitre arranged for him to get away, which reminded me of Tarkin allowing the Millennium Falcon to get away from the Death Star so he could follow it to his base.
And that's why Lemaitre is doing it, so he can find out if Ian really does have a message for James Sterling.
That's right. Right. So everything comes back to Star Wars, by the way.
Yeah. By the way, notice how everyone in this is referring to each other as citizen.
Yes.
Which is not the way we talk today, but it's what that is it's a stab at their previous culture, which was aristocratic, and so you'd have lords and ladies and kings and stuff. And this is like, okay, no, all that's gone. We're all equal now. We're all just citizens.
Except some of the pigs are more equal.
And you will be punished if you do not recognize the equality of everyone.
Right.
It was a forced language change, shall we say.
Well, we see it come out, though. Sometimes some citizens are more equal than others, which is something that comes out oftentimes in these. We see that later in the Soviet Union, where
Animal Farm.
Yep, Animal Farm. Yep.
Animal Farm. One of the other things we notice is the soldiers sometimes sort of push back at the officers over them. Like, hey, look, we're all citizens, so you're going to order me to do something, but I'm only going to do it if I want to. Mm-hmm. We saw that in the beginning when they were taken prisoner. We see that a couple times. So that it shows the flaw in the system of a completely flat hierarchy system.
It's like in HMS Pinafore when you have the captain of the Pinafore, and the visiting admiral demands that he issue each one of his orders to the sailors, following it with "if you please."
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's not going to work well.
Well, it's interesting too. You watch this, that even though there was supposedly was a flat system, a hierarchy naturally developed.
Yes.
It always does. There's always going to be someone in charge. There's always going to be superiors and inferiors. And it's just, that's a natural consequence of human nature.
Yeah. But you want the guy in charge to be a really good one, like Captain Pike, not Captain Lorca.
Yeah, not Lorca.
Exactly. Right. Different show, but yes, no, I'm kidding.
So I have a note here where I say, what is it with Susan's constant headaches in this first season? Like, she's constantly getting these like terrible headaches that makes her sick, and she has to go lie down and go see a doctor. And in this one, she gets a headache that turns into a fever that ends up almost getting them captured because they have to take her to a doctor, who turns them in eventually. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the writing we were just talking about of this character.
Again, it's a way to ramp up the drama, because if they had cut that whole section out, they could have cut out one whole episode basically.
Yeah. I wondered if Carol Ann Ford also had vacation in this serial, because that's often they'd use illness or imprisonment as a way of knocking someone out of the plot for an episode or two so they could get a week's vacation.
Right.
But it's also a way of just stretching out the serial so it can fill 6 parts, so they don't have to spend the money on new sets earlier.
That's true. So meanwhile, the doctor finally gets to Paris. He shows up. He realizes he can't walk to the conciergerie wearing his 1960s era clothing or whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
Whatever you want to describe it, but it's certainly not 18th century Paris. So he goes to a tailor and barters in exchange for a uniform worn by a provincial deputy for the government, the new government, and then tries to bluff his way into the jail to get Ian and Barbara and Susan out. It ends up meeting Lemaitre and being taken off to report on his southern province that he's the deputy of to Robespierre himself. And we meet Robespierre, the tyrant of France.
One thing to note about, so the doctor's new costume that he's wearing is not just, it's a period costume, and he's got this big French, blue, white, and red sash that he's wearing. And he's got a fancy hat. But what's fancy about the hat is it's got these huge, ridiculous ostrich plumes. Yes. And it's like, nobody else is wearing a hat like this. So this is just the doctor being flamboyant here.
Exactly.
I use this as the episode art for this episode, so you'll see that on our episode
it's
art
pretty
for this.
impressive.
It is an impressive costume.
Yeah.
So the Robespierre thinks that the doctor is the head of his southern province because he doesn't know what the deputy from the southern province looks like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But and he says, I don't think the South is doing enough to root out enemies. And the doctor says, well, maybe it's because we have fewer enemies there.
Yeah,
to root out, which I think is a really nice commentary.
Maybe Paris could take a hint from us.
Exactly.
And what's interesting here is the doctor comes perilously close to trying to change history. I mean, you can argue that's what he's doing, because he tries to talk Robespierre out of the Reign of Terror and going easier on people. And this is a very interesting moment dramatically, because Robespierre is not played as a straightforward villain. Lemaitre is kind of alarmed when the doctor starts giving advice to Robespierre.
Right.
But Robespierre takes it seriously, and it's like, yes, I know. He explains, he doesn't use this term, but he explains basically, I'm in a double bind. I don't know what to do. If I start being lenient now, it's going to cause problems. But I also know that the fact I'm doing this is also causing problems and is stirring up new enemies, the fact that I'm executing them. But what am I supposed to do? He's like a guy that's got a wolf by both ears and he's afraid to let go because of what's going to happen. So
that's a great image.
Even Robespierre is torn by what's going on here. So he's not just a flat villain.
No, it comes out again in this one because later on they'll refer back to the Aztecs, which is they can't change history. So I'm not sure what the Doctor's, if he's just amusing himself with Robespierre here, just to have an argument that isn't going to change anything.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it, where he's just kind of having fun at the, because of course this is his favorite time of history, so he's got to have fun with it. Apparently, I don't know.
I think he's also distracting Robespierre from trying to look at him as this, dig deeper into whether he's actually a deputy from the southern province. So who knows? But it's an interesting scene in audible format when I listen to it. So
and they weren't really consistent, and they've never really been consistent about changing history. It's yes and no, and so they had the Aztecs a really big "we must not try to change history, maybe even can't" message, and here they're just going softer with it.
Right. Although they do, like I said, Barbara does bring it up later that in the Aztecs they could not change history. So we'll get Fixed Point in Time much later in Doctor Who canon, but for now this is a similar thing. So
meanwhile, back at the ranch, Leon,
Leon Colbert
has shown up, and he's an associate of Jules. And he instantly has eyes for Barbara, and Barbara instantly has eyes for him, and Susan notices it even though she's sick.
Yes.
It's like, you like him, don't you?
It is an interesting bit of a character moment for Barbara here, because, we have this feeling in other episodes that maybe Ian and Barbara could be an item, but it doesn't really go anywhere. But there's this ability for Barbara to kind of, this is not the first time Barbara has connected with somebody on one of these journeys. So it's interesting to see that. Whereas Ian has not. I don't think we've seen that where Ian has.
Not really.
So Ian, meanwhile, speaking of Ian, is he's out wandering around near the Chiangri sign, and Jules hears that someone's looking for him there. And so Jules and Jean go out and they
kidnap him.
They kidnap him. They bop him over the head and haul him back unconscious to the house.
There's a lot of people getting smacked over the head in this thing. I mean,
there's a lot of concussions in this episode. So they get him back there where Barbara will recognize him, and we'll get back to that. But meanwhile, the Doctor is back at the prison with Lemaitre, where he's detained because there's a tailor who's waiting. That tailor that he got the uniform from is waiting to give up the Doctor as a fraud. He's not really. He just bought this from me, and I want to turn him in.
Part of the way he's able to do that is part of the bargain. What the Doctor bartered with was his original set of clothes and his ring.
Yeah,
and so the tailor has brought the clothes and the ring to Lemaitre as evidence that this guy's weird. This is what he gave me in exchange for the provincial uniform. And he also is like, by the way, can I get that back? Because, I need to sell it. And he's like, nope, this is going to be evidence.
Yeah. Yes. So the tailor is out his uniform and the payment.
Yeah. But Lemaitre gives him some money to compensate him for them.
That's true. So it turns out, so Leon is going to take Ian to where Barbara and Susan are, he says. Isn't it? Or is that where he's taking him? I forget where he's taking him. He's taking Ian for a meeting somewhere.
Right. So the idea is that Ian is going to go meet Leon at a disused church.
Right.
And debrief him and hope he gets information about where James Sterling is, because nobody, even though Ian was told go find Jules Renan and he'll know about James Sterling, he doesn't.
Right.
So he says, I don't know who this James Sterling guy is, but maybe Leon does. He's got lots of connections.
That's correct. That's right. Well, it turns out that Leon is a traitor. He's actually a counter-revolutionary.
He's the traitor that has been betraying people on their Underground Railroad to death, like the two guys we saw get shot in episode 1.
Rouvray and D'Artagnan. I always get that wrong. I forget what his name is. So
D'Argenson.
D'Argenson, thank you. So Barbara and Susan, everybody keeps ending up back in the prison. I just found that kind of funny how everybody kept getting re-imprisoned. This prison has a revolving door, apparently. And so they're back in the prison, and the Doctor has another plan to escape from the prison. And she objects to his plan, and he says, don't argue. You know my plans always work perfectly, right? Sure, Doctor, sure. But Barbara does escape, but he can't get Susan out. And meanwhile, Ian is rescued from Leon by Jules, who they end up killing Leon. That'll come back. Although Barbara is a little upset at first, but that kind of she kind of smooths over fairly quickly once they tell her, no,
Yeah.
he was the traitor.
He was well. First, let's mention how Susan and Barbara get back in prison. They go to see the physician to treat
Right.
Susan, and he looks at Susan and says, "This isn't a big deal. She'll be okay, but I need to go get some leeches for bloodletting." And
Yeah.
Susan does not like that idea.
right, but the physician then steps outside and locks Susan and Barbara in while he goes to the concierge and says, "I've got these people and you want to come arrest them." And so they do. I noticed they kept referring to him as physician,
Yes.
not doctor.
Mhm.
And I assume the reason they did that was to avoid audio confusion on the part of the
Right.
children in the audience of, is he supposed to be the doctor or something? And so they just always kept using the word physician instead of doctor.
Sure.
That's true. Although the medical doctors weren't necessarily called doctor in
Right.
regular conversation too.
And
So it
there,
works.
There could be a historical explanation like that, but I assumed it was for production reasons.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when Barbara gets out of the prison because Lemaitre arranges for her to be let go. Susan is still in prison, but he gets Barbara out. She goes back to Jules's house, and that's where and Jules and Ian come in and tell her that Leon has been killed, and he was a bad guy, and that's why they had to kill him. And at this point, Barbara throws a tantrum, and it's clear that it's clear in the subtext. This is partly because she liked
Right.
Leon.
Yes.
But it's also wrapped up in her knowledge of history as a teacher. Because in the disused church before Leon got killed, he made this patriotic speech about what France was like before. What I'm doing is right. We're improving things here in France. It's not like the days of the corrupt monarchy when we were all at the mercy of, the royals and so forth. And he gets to make this patriotic speech that it shows he's not all bad. He's just on the other side. And that's what comes out in Barbara's speech, too. She tells Ian he was a traitor to you. To his side, he was a patriot. And she says the revolution isn't all bad. Neither are the people who support it. It's changed things for the whole world, and good, honest people gave their lives for that change. And then Ian says, well, he got what he deserved. And Barbara says, you check your history books before you decide what people deserve.
That's a Gandalf moment there for Barbara.
Yeah.
Where he tells Frodo there are many who deserve punishment, but who are you to decide who that is? And I did think that was a very nuanced approach to looking at history. That history is not just all the good guys versus the bad guys. That there is good and there's bad, and sometimes within the same person. And there are good things that came out of the revolution, in addition to all the bad that we're seeing. I mean, it is called the Reign of Terror for a reason, but that there was good, and the same thing goes with the American Revolution. There was plenty of good that we might say came out of the revolution, but there were also bad things that happened. People who were, abused or injured or killed or unjustly, and what we might call war crimes today occurred in the midst of it.
And it's a good warning that you could have the right motive, you could have the right cause, but go about it the completely wrong way that ends up hurting more people than it helps.
Right.
And it's that you can be a zealous soldier for a good cause and still do atrocities.
Yeah. So Jules explains that he's fighting against the revolution not because he's an aristocrat, but because of the anarchy and the lack of loyalty and honor. I thought that was an interesting way he defined it. He says there are only two sides today, Barbara: those who rule by fear and treachery, and those who fight for reason and justice. Anyone who betrays these principles is worse than the devil in hell, he says. And then by putting it in that way, Robespierre is as bad as the corrupt monarchy. And then those who are the true revolutionaries oppose both the bad monarchy and the Reign of Terror. And I really like that nuance that they get at here.
Yeah, he says he's neither on the side of the royalists or on the side of the peasants. He's in between.
Right. Then we get this reveal. Lemaitre shows up alone without soldiers and reveals that he is, in fact, James Sterling. And he needs Ian and Barbara because he needs to find out who is being groomed to take over after Robespierre. Robespierre, especially in history, this happened on this date. Robespierre is overthrown. He's arrested by the deputies, the body of deputies, and this will end the reign of terror. And
now there's something interesting at this point, which is how could an Englishman like James Sterling become this high French official?
Right.
Apparently, and this is glossed over by the TARDIS translation circuit, we will later learn. Apparently, he's not only speaks French fluently, but he's got a perfect French accent, which is possible. Spies can do that.
Yep.
And he's apparently been here long enough that in the chaos that followed the French Revolution, he's been able to infiltrate to rise to this position. But it's interesting that he has this high position, and they actually explain it a little bit for us. The companions had already deduced he must have an alias. They just didn't know who he was. Right. And he fills in an additional piece and says, well, you must have guessed in order to be useful to England, I'd have to have a high position. Mm-hmm. So not really true, but sure. it at least fits.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, when you step back and think about it from outside the story, the things that the chief interrogator did, the moral, the immorality, the crimes, the bad, evil things he did as chief interrogator, sending people to their death for the sake of England, for his duty. That's a serious,
not such a sterling reputation on this guy,
so to speak. So before he can sail for England and bring his information back, he has to find one final piece of information: is who is this Paul Barras, the guy who is leading the group counter to Robespierre? Who is he meeting with that he's going to put up as the new leader of France?
Right.
Who is going to be the next ruler of France?
So Robespierre has learned that Paul Barras who is another official in this national convention, is leading a faction against him and wants to replace him as ruler of France. And he doesn't know who he's going to replace him with, but he's got a meeting coming up at a hotel called The Sinking Ship with someone who is maybe the next ruler.
Right. And so he can't go because he'll be recognized. He is the chief interrogator. So he convinces Jules and Ian and Barbara to go and to be spies for him at this place. And for somehow they get the waitress and the innkeeper to take the night off. I don't want to speculate too much on what they had to do to him and her. So they kind of take over, and they find out, surprise, if you know history, it's not really that much of a surprise. The next ruler of France will be Napoleon Bonaparte. And as anyone who knows, English history would have known watching this, all of this worry about, after the reign of terror, England has really got to watch out. We've got to warn England. Well, Napoleon Bonaparte becomes a major pain for all of Europe after this point. Yeah. He almost takes over all of Europe.
In fact, they're kind of glossing. I mean, and you could say maybe they didn't because history needed to play out naturally, but Barbara, as history teacher, totally could have shortened the plot at this point and says, I'll tell you exactly who the next ruler of France is going to be. And here's what he's going to do.
Right. Exactly. So, yes, it turns out, yes, Webster was right. Whoever followed the terror would be a problem. And so, and this is the point at which Barbara reiterates what they learned in the Aztecs, is that they can't change history. She kind of comes right out and says that to everyone. And then there's the one last thing is they go back to the prison and I think to get Susan out, right? Susan is the last one still in the jail. Right. Yep. That's what Lemaitre was holding over them to get them to go along with him, was he'll let Susan out, but you've got to help me with this last thing. And the doctor this time tricks the jailer into releasing all the prisoners in the conciergerie, just as Robespierre is dragged in by the soldiers. And in fact, I like the historical accuracy because he's holding his jaw. He's been shot in the jaw. Robespierre has.
Mhm.
That's what happened when they arrested him.
So now we know exactly when we are. This is July 27th, 1794, the day of Robespierre's fall. He gets shot in the jaw, and then he's executed the next day, July 28th, which we don't see.
Right, thankfully.
Mhm.
So then they escape back to the TARDIS, go back in, and off they go on their way. So again, I have to say I really liked this one. I enjoyed it. Everything worked well. There were no big plot holes staring out at me. There's a few things here and there, like any story will have, but I really enjoyed this one. Any other notes you guys have on this episode?
Well, I thought it might be good to talk for just a second about the different ways we experienced it, because you...
Oh, yeah.
So did you listen to the whole thing? You didn't see any of the video?
I watched, on the BBC, I think it's BBC site or the BBC America. I think it's BBC site. They had clips, of select scenes. So the scene where Robespierre is brought into the prison at the very end. There's one where there's the doctor in his finery. So a couple things like that.
Okay.
And then one where they're arrested at the very... So one from each of the 6 episodes.
But your primary experience was listening to the audio version with the linking narration.
That's correct.
How did that work for you?
I think it worked great. Just like with the Highlanders, although that didn't have linking narration like this, I think it worked fine. I was able to follow the story very well. I found it very interesting. They must have had 2 different audio sources for the recording, because that changed at times. Most of it was fairly good. There was a couple spots where it wasn't as clear, which is fine.
Right.
It was perfectly listening, but there was just it sounded different. But it was good. It was a little, just about 2 hours total. You know, it's the normal length of the thing. And I enjoyed it listening to it via Audible. I thought it was a very good format for listening.
Father, how did you experience it?
I actually had found on Daily Motion, someone had posted, Daily Motion is supposedly a legitimate video site, but you can find stuff
shady.
like this, a little shady at times.
Yeah.
So you watched one of the fan reanimations, one of the fan reconstructions.
No, like I said, it's kind of a shady site. I believe it actually was the DVD.
Oh, okay. And then I watched the official DVD version, which had 4 of the episodes just in the standard video that has survived from Cyprus. And then it had a couple of episodes that were animated. And it was good animation. You know, it's the black and white animation.
Yep.
It's impressive for, the budget that they have. It's a little creepy. The people move a little bit like Jerry Anderson puppets. But it's actually quite good. I thought it was very nice for the budget they had for it, and made it very easy to watch. Much easier than like watching a telesnap reconstruction.
Right. Yeah. I was surprised that the telesnaps was one person who did it as a hobby.
Yeah, although he got paid.
He eventually got paid.
Yeah.
But
initially he did start out as a hobby, yes.
Yeah. I thought that was fascinating.
And he invented his own camera mounting device, I guess.
It's like Nerds Unite, the geeks of the world.
Well, just the fact we have the audio is kind of like Nerds Unite. Hey, let's wire up our reel-to-reel recorder to the audio output of the TV, because it didn't have like the line out like your modern TV does. They'd actually have to either hold the microphone to the speaker or actually go into the TV and tap into the speaker leads.
And that's how we got the really good fan audio that most of these are based on.
Yep.
Now, it's probably another discussion entirely. In fact, it is. But I just want to mention this is an interesting argument in the larger argument about copyright and encryption of commercially available entertainment like this today, where they encrypt it. They don't want us to copy it or record it. When in fact, this is the way we've saved a lot of the stuff we have.
And it was an argument back then. If you watch, I can't remember what video. I think it might be that same guy that did the episode about the lost, or the YouTube video about the lost episodes, where he talks about how the BBC was actually upset about the telesnaps.
Yeah,
they were not happy about this. They weren't happy about the audio recordings, and now, of course, they're very grateful for them because they're able to help them
make money.
Recover them. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, they're making lots of money.
But they didn't even want the audio recordings or the telesnaps originally, and so it's kind of interesting. And it'll be interesting going forward where so much more of these TV shows and everything are available in different formats. But could we get to a point where maybe some stuff that's being produced today would be lost, except someone has their Plex server set up somewhere? Plex is your home media server.
And that's the thing. There's so much media being produced now that if they would make it all available at market prices, the pirate market would vanish.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they're not making it all available at commercial market prices.
Well, I mean,
that's why you don't have LimeWire and Napster and other pirated music anymore, because they made it all available.
Yeah.
Well, and there are shows from like the 70s and 80s, and they're very little known shows. They're shows that people really didn't watch to begin with. But if you did want to go back and watch them, assuming maybe you could find VHS copies from 30 years ago, they don't exist.
Exactly. Or, someone's converted their VHS copy into a YouTube video and you can watch it that way.
Well, I got to tell you, we're really going far afield. But one of the things that is not commercially viable, really, are the ads from when we were all kids that you can all find on YouTube now, because someone recorded a show on their VHS tape. And no, they weren't trying to get the ads, but the ads are there, and now they can put them online, and we can all go, do you remember that ad for what's such and such? And
Alka-Seltzer or
what? I found like these old Washington Mutual Insurance ads of this crazy guy eating like day old convenience store sushi, and it was hysterical, and I wanted to show my kids.
Or time to make the donuts.
Exactly.
I remember time to make the donuts. I sometimes say that to myself when I'm getting ready to go call a dance.
Exactly.
All right, we're way off topic now, so let's get back to. I do want to read that. I did remember the feedback.
Yes, we got feedback, Tom. Let's not forget to read that.
By the way, before we do the feedback, I just wanted to mention, it'll be a while before we do our next William Hartnell episode, but I'm really looking forward to the next William Hartnell episode that we're going to review, because it's Planet of the Giants. It's the opener of season 2. It is the kind of episode that is so inventive and you would not see for decades again. There was a lot of experimentation in the early days of Doctor Who before it kind of settled into its groove. And this is one of the outside of the box episodes or serials.
Nice.
We don't see anything like it again until Peter Capaldi's 11th Doctor, really.
Interesting. I'll look forward to that. All right. So we did have some feedback on, let's see, episode 124, Utopia, which was with those first of those 3 final episodes from season 3 of New Who and the 10th Doctor. And so Kelly Brown posted on, I think this was from Facebook. She said, I was always fascinated with the scene when Martha tells the Doctor that Professor Yana, has a fob watch. I loved how David Tennant played it. It was as if he didn't want to believe another Time Lord could be around, but there was also an element of fear, as if he suspected it could be the Master. As if he was thinking if any other Time Lord survived, it would have to be the Master. So, very interesting. Yes, I mean, considering how things were left with the Master from Classic Who, that could see where that would be both exciting and scary for him at the same time. And then from episode 125, the very next episode, The Sound of Drums, Nick Sens sent this via Twitter. Just a thought. I think the use of the term President-elect of the United States is an erroneous attempt by the writers at giving the President of the United States a formal-sounding title. They may have thought it to mean the duly elected president, not elected but not yet sworn in.
It's possible. It certainly would explain why they keep referring to him as the president, when as the president-elect he would not be and would not be functioning in this capacity.
Right.
On the other hand, the term elect used in this sense is a British term. I mean, it is part of British English. I know that because in Gilbert and Sullivan's opera The Mikado, towards the end, in the finale, Yum Yum and Nanki Poo have gotten married, and they're talking to the Mikado, the Emperor of Japan, and it's been revealed that Nanki Poo is the son of the Mikado. And now that he's married Yum Yum, Yum Yum is not just his daughter-in-law elect, but his daughter-in-law elected.
Interesting. So, yes.
Or he's gone and married Yum Yum.
We are in a Gilbert and Sullivan mood today, folks. All right.
Oh, I was thinking earlier about, all the stuff with Susan and how she keeps impeding the plot for reasons of budget. And it's like, slow the plot down, laddie, slow the plot down. Yay, hey, slow the plot down. We'll scuttle the story and run her aground. Give us some time to slow the plot down.
If we ever did outtakes, I would certainly include that in our outtakes. Someday. All right. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for Jimmy to sing us some pastiches on Gilbert and Sullivan and to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Aaron W., Brooke K., Joel L., Pamela F., and Daniel S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And that's it from us. What did you think of The Reign of Terror? Have you been able to watch or listen to it? Are you interested in doing so? And if you have, let us know what you think and what you think about our commentary. Go to sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page and leave us some feedback there, or send an email to doctorwho@sqpn.com. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 2007 Christmas special, Voyage of the Damned, starring David Tennant and a little famous songbird, shall we say, another singer in a Christmas special. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me in sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
I'm glad to be here, and thanks, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, I'm rather tired of your insinuations that I am not master of this podcast.
Right. This is going to be fun.